Yo, so today I'm going to be giving you guys some tips on how I've made my melodies better and how you can make yours too, along with some like weird productivity kind of tips scattered throughout the video. So just like all my other talking videos, I have a list written down on a little piece of paper with all categories. So I have in general, realistic, dark, ethnic, and ambient, which I'm kind of all going to group together just because they're all vaguely similar in like how you make the melody. What matters is like the sound selection and effects. And then hyperpop, and then some more in general, and then probably the productivity tips will end up being at the end. So to start off the in general category, the one thing I did want to recap from the last video, which I'm going to try not to mention things from that last video, so if you're interested on other tips, definitely go watch that, is just listening to music. It's something that I struggle with, like keeping up to date on what's happening. Personally, if I'm going to listen to something, I'm just going to click on my playlist. I know everything in there is good and that I like, so I would go to that instead of finding new artists, which is something you should really be doing, is just finding new sounds, knowing what's popular, and just overall listening to music. You can pull things from different genres, like you might find like a little thing you notice in like a country song that you like, and you can incorporate into like the normal like trap melody or whatever. But overall, just keeping up to date and listening to all different genres. But the main way that I kind of do this, if I've really fallen behind and haven't listened to anything new in a while, is just going on Rap Caviar on Spotify. I believe it's the top like most popular songs from the past 30 days, I believe. Maybe a little bit longer. You can see here there's like a May 13th in here. But overall, this is just like the top songs. It's a good way to kind of catch up in a sense. Next on the in general section is simplicity in MIDI. Another thing that I really struggle with is making my melodies like simple and accessible, because really with a melody, it's like a third of the puzzle, right? You have your melody, you have your drums, and then you have the artist's vocals, and then on top of all of that, you have like vocal effects and all the engineering stuff and like making it all sound good. So you should be exporting your loops sounding fairly empty, which is like kind of a hard thing to get used to, just so that there's room for drums, and overall the whole beat and process is just a little bit more simple. Lately, how I've been doing that, I haven't really done this in videos yet because I'm not too good at it, but usually if I want to do something really simple, sometimes I'll start with the top melody first instead of overcomplicating it by making really super full sounding chords, making a little melody within the chords, and then a top line melody. And then also like a kind of a good way to like drill this into yourself, try to like limit your sound usage in a sense. So like say for like one melody, you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to only use 4 sounds. One of them is going to be chords, one of them is going to be a top line, a little accent, and then a bass to kind of for like the intro or something. That's just a good way to like fully utilize a sound, but also keep the melody not overcomplicating it and making it more simple. And how the MIDI kind of ties into that is making top lines, especially if I'm clicking them in, just like playing it back, sometimes that's a little like boring and it's not like the best process, but making the MIDI kind of like streamlines that, because you have the immediate feedback of you touching the key on the keyboard and then you immediately hearing the sound, and you can kind of just go note by note and figure stuff out. And that also kind of ties into like learning a scale. D sharp minor is like the go-to one for me, all the black notes, and then F and B. And then of course A minor and C major are just all the white keys. But yeah, when I use the MIDI, usually my melodies come out a little bit more catchy, and they always are more simple because I can only use 10 fingers, so there's no crazy big chords with like 2 bass notes of like 7ths, 9ths, and then a top line all on top of that. So it just kind of simplifies things. Next for the in general is making your sound selection a little bit more diverse and unique. So personally, I feel that I kind of gravitate towards the same sounds to start off my melody, and then that also trickles into like top lines and stuff where I'm just going to click on things that I've used before and I know sound good. This is a really bad habit because it makes your melodies a little diverse even to yourself in a sense, because if someone would look through your weekly loops, they can kind of pick up on a trend almost, that oh, he's using the LA Custom C7 for all of these melodies, or oh, the umbrella lead is in all of these melodies, and there's not really like as diverse melodies, if you know what I'm saying. But the way I combat this is, I mentioned this in the last video, but using browser functions in VSTs. My favorite way is like going into Analog Labs or Omnisphere, whatever your go-to is, and just searching a broad term instead of like finite searching, because I know in Omnisphere you can get really detailed with it and sometimes you'll end up at the same sounds you've used before. But if you just search something really broad like synthpad, where there's a ton of different options, and then start your melody from a preset you haven't used before, and then go from there. Sometimes you can get a little bit of a different sound. And then my next point was one shots, which also just kind of tie into sound selection. You know, it's a sound. It's like the amount of control you have with like slide notes and then like the envelopes within like the sampler when you're using one shots is very good. And sometimes it is more beneficial to use a one shot rather than trying to find a sound in a VST. Like sometimes using slide notes in one shot sounds better than a great poly lead from Serum. But overall, just experimenting with one shots is a really good thing to do, especially for accent sounds. One of my favorite things to do is place a note on the root note of the scale, then go one note above that in the scale. So in D sharp minor, it would be a D sharp, and then an F, and then you make that top note a slide note, and then you put it up 2 octaves so you get a really fast sweep. Turn the envelope on like an 808 so it cuts off right when it stops playing, and then add a delay from there. It's just a nice little accent to kind of kickstart your melody in a sense. Next, for in general, something again I've been doing a lot is using automation clips. Well, doing a lot as of lately. I haven't really done it a lot in the past. But automation clips are just a great way to like add a lot of movement to your melodies, I think. Mainly what I use it for is background sounds, and then I'll throw a filter automation on there, and then kind of match up where the filter like turns off to where the chord changes. So you're kind of building up to that chord change and kind of like emphasizing it and just making it hit a little bit harder. But you can also mess around with automation clips for things like Finisher Micro on the Infinity preset, where you can automate that kind of sparkly feeling just to make it a little bit more interesting. And then also you can automate pretty much any VST along with a volume and all that kind of stuff. So you really can get really creative with it and make your sounds just sound really unique. Now we can get started on the realistic section of the video. So I don't really have that many points on this, but I do have 2 of them. One of them being velocity is very important. The more gentle and realistic you can make your velocities really matters, along with like hand doing the velocities, like altering them, so you can kind of emphasize things and also just make things seem smoother. So maybe doing like a little build up in velocity before a chord change to again emphasize that chord and make it hit a little bit harder. Or when you do the little grace notes where it's like a tiny note and then a note like here, making that smaller grace note maybe a little quieter or a little louder depending on how you want the melody to sound. But the easiest way to really get the velocities sounding right is playing everything out on the MIDI, especially for piano melodies. It's very easy to just figure out some chords if you know a scale, and then work on a top line from there. And then again, that'll make it more simple and not overcomplicate it. But then that kind of ties me into the next tip, which is the overdub feature. So basically, if you go into FL Studio, but if you go up here, there's this little piano with the plus, and you can go ahead and click that on before you record, and that makes it so you can record on top of chords. That like makes no sense, and like all the words get mushed together. But like you could have a chord pattern and record a top line on top of it without the chords getting deleted, or you could record a melody inside the chords and the chords won't like get altered or deleted at all. So that's just a really nice way to record things. And also I just didn't know that for the longest time, and it was really like kind of holding me back in like recording stuff on the MIDI. Alright, so now we can move on to like the dark ethnic ambient section. Again, just gonna group them all together. But basically everything kind of focuses on one core concept, that it's a lot of repetition, and overall just like variation doesn't matter that much. Of course you do want variation in your melodies, but like you don't do it in dark melodies within the pattern. At least I don't. I do it through effects and stuff. That's why one of my points was effects is greater than variation in these kind of melodies. Again, you could do something like automation clips and spice it up that way, or something that I've been doing lately is rendering things out. Either having a reversed layer that's pitched up an octave can work really well as variation without overcomplicating it, or just having a separately affected version of it so you can kind of switch in and out between them. Say one maybe has like a phaser or something on it and it just sounds a little bit different. Another way you can create that variation with really not changing up the MIDI too much is like the 5 semitone transpose. So if you're working from the root note, so say you have a D sharp minor chord, you can copy that chord over and pitch it up 5 little clicks by doing a shift in the up arrow. And then it'll still be in the scale, but it'll just sound different. So you're not really changing anything. You're just like changing the pitch, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it. But then it also works going down. So if you go up, you would be at G sharp, and then if you go down, you'd be at A sharp. Overall, just a great way to create a little bit of variation in these kind of melodies. And then another thing that I know a lot of people do, but I really haven't done until like maybe the past 3-4 months, I don't really know, but using triplets or third step in FL Studio. So when you're laying out your melody, you can go up here to this little magnet feature and then go over to third step, and then the grid will change. As you can see, if you look at the little grid, there's 3 spaces, and then if I were to switch to half step, and then if I were to switch to half step, there would be 4 little spaces. So it just allows you to kind of switch up the timing in your melodies kind of, and always like these dark melodies just sound better if they're like triplets, because then you can do cool like triplet hi-hat rolls as well when you do the drums. And then the last thing I kind of have for this whole category, besides all this like repetition stuff and like variation through different means rather than just like making a different kind of pattern, is cool bass lines. I really noticed that if I do a cool bass line, the overall like intro of the melody just sounds really cool, and there's really not like a focus on not overcomplicating it, because if you think about it, it's an intro, so there's not going to be drums playing. Well, there might be like a little like clap or something, and the artist's vocals really won't be in the intro. So you can really just go crazy with the bass line and spice it up. So 2 of my favorite basses to use are the Big Fatty in Omnisphere and then the Growler in Omnisphere. They're both really good for like cool slides. So usually when I make my bass patterns, I'll have just a steady note playing whatever the bass line is, and then at the end, before that changes, like up 5, down 5, or just a different chord in general, then I'll do a little triplet roll or at least some kind of slide to just make it a little bit more interesting. So finally, for our little categories, we have hyperpop, which unfortunately I haven't really worked on that much, so I don't have many new tips. The main one being going back to sound selection. Just having unique sound selection in hyperpop melodies really helps. Personally, I'm just always more like fixated on a melody that I'm like, I don't know where these sounds came from. When so most of the melodies that are coming out now, you can kind of pick and choose and be like, oh wait, I have that, it's from one of Synthetic's banks, because his banks are huge and probably used for most hyperpop melodies. But overall, you can just kind of switch up your VST selection rather than just straight up going to Serum. You can find some cool stuff in Omnisphere, and then the big one would be Vital. You can get some really wacky like accents, like the A, E, O arp from Vital is really good for like Ken Carson type melodies. It's just super distorted and bouncy. But overall, just switching it up from the normal like basic hyperpop sounds like a sine lead and the rewind pluck will just overall make it sound a lot better. And then the other 2 tips also kind of tie into the variation and simplicity things that I've mentioned before. But one, making simple catchy top lines. Again, you can use the MIDI for this, or you can just click it in. But again, finding a top line is a lot easier if you do it first and then add the chords later. Just kind of makes the process a little bit different and kind of spices it up a little bit from what people normally do. So I've been doing that lately. And then also trying not to add so many layers to it, to where you have like a bass note, like a chord, and then maybe like a chord change in the middle of it before it switches to like a completely different chord, and then like a couple top lines on top of that. Maybe just sticking to like some repetitive chords and then a top line that doesn't change too much. And then the other one I have is using gates and repetition to create bounce. So the main ways I create bounce in a hyperpop melody is like I'll start off with like a super kind of ambient pluck melody for like the bass of it, but then I want to get that energy up, so I'll either copy the chords into a little bit of a harsher pluck and just repeat them every like half a cell or so it's very like dun 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 dun, and it just repeats and adds a bunch of energy. Or I'll go ahead and add a synth and then add some kind of gate to that, rather that be like the 1-beat gate paired with like a filter automation, or just like a trance gate like the lead in Futsal Shuffle. Alright, and then just kind of end it off with another in general tip. I really find that trying out different kind of genres, even if they're still within this like rap, trap kind of thing, really does help. Like if you only make hyperpop melodies, go ahead and try to make some piano melodies. I guarantee you'll learn something from making those that'll go back into your hyperpop melodies and help those as well as making completely different genres. Like something that I'm definitely going to try out for a video is like making a full like EDM song, and then learning from that and seeing what I pick up from like effects wise, automation wise, all that kind of stuff. But I just think trying as much stuff as possible can really help you out in the long run, and overall make you more diverse. Because if you only focus on hyperpop melodies and then you're in a session with like Lil Baby, I don't think he'll really want hyperpop melodies. He'll probably want some Lil Baby type piano melodies. If you don't know how to make those, you're kind of stuck and you have this huge opportunity, but you only know how to make that type of melody. Of course you can use loops, but I just think it's nice to be able to make a little bit of everything. So yeah, that's pretty much it for all like the main tips I have in this video. So now we can get into like the weird productivity tips, I guess. I don't really know. I really only have 2 points and they both kind of tie in together. One being making multiple things a day and doing different styles every day. Kind of ties into the past thing I said with different styles, but just being consistent with it. You don't want to have like a weird day where you don't make anything. That'll throw off, like if you're shooting for a number every day, which I do, I try to go for 3 loops a day. That'll throw that off for like the whole week, so then you're not being able to make like 20 plus a week. And overall, you'll just improve on a more consistent basis rather than making like loops or melodies sporadically and then kind of improving at random points when you like figure stuff out. Stay consistent and do it every day, then you're gonna figure something out new every day and you're just learning something new every day. And what kind of goes along with that is something that is really kind of important to me, which is scheduling yourself. Just like setting away time where you're just making beats, nothing else is happening. You're just looking at your computer, just figuring things out and experimenting. And these times are different for everybody, but personally the schedule that works for me is ideally waking up at 8 a.m., which really doesn't happen that often. Usually it's more like 8:30, 9, but that's still a decent time. Then by 12 to 1, I want to have at least 3 loops done. And then I go ahead and make videos for the rest of the time in like the afternoon, or edit really whatever kind of fits in, or I'll go like lift or do something outside. It's crazy. And after dinner, then I'll like make a couple more loops and then edit those videos to get posted, make thumbnails, etc. But overall, just sticking to a schedule just makes you a little bit more disciplined, I feel, and you can get more stuff done in the time that you have. And also a thing that kind of ties in with that is I hope I mentioned, I don't know, but like having a number for yourself. So for me, that's 3 a day. And I don't count loops that are like bad. Like I'll be like, oh, I'm still -1 on the day. That loop wasn't very good. But I'll just try to make 3 quality loops a day, and that will kind of keep me away from like going on my phone and that kind of stuff, because everyone knows you can get into a rabbit hole on like Instagram or TikTok, that you can just like fall into a deep abyss for hours where you're just scrolling and scrolling. So it's just kind of a good way to just like set daily goals for yourself and that kind of stuff. Like, oh, I want to make this amount today and a video or whatever you want to do that day. But yeah, that last part was probably a big ramble, but that's pretty much it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys picked up on something that you can insert into your melodies or beats or whatever you want to use with this semi-information. I don't know. But here is a random beat I made. Probably that Rage one. I really liked that one. Or the hyperpop video that's coming out tomorrow. Who knows? Well, it didn't come out tomorrow, because this comes out in like a month. This is just big old confusion. Bye.